Welcome to the SDG Talks, a set of talks about the Sustainable Development Goals and quality education. For this talk, we welcome Mr. Martin Nesirky, Director of the UN Information Service Vienna. The SDGs represent a common agenda to ensure a decent life for each individual, taking into consideration also intergenerational solidarity and planetary boundaries. SLOGA Platform organizes the SDG Talks in collaboration with the UN Association of Slovenia to promote the SDGs and global citizenship education in the decade of action. The SDG Talks are organized within the Bridge 47 project, which was created to bring people together to share and learn from each other. We mobilize civil society from all around the world to contribute to a transformation towards global justice and eradication of poverty through global citizenship education. My name is Adriana Aralica. I work with SLOGA Platform and I'm a member of the UN Association of Slovenia Executive Board. Mr. Nesirky, once again, welcome and thank you for joining us for this conversation. If we start with the 75th anniversary of the UN, which we celebrated last year, and on this occasion, the UN has invited people around the globe to participate in the broadest global dialogue on the challenges of today's world and the future we want. In the beginning, I would invite you to look into the future and imagine the world you would want to see in 10 years. What are the 3 changes you would like to see?
Well, first of all, Adriana, thank you very much for inviting me and for organizing these SDG talks. I think it's a fantastic idea, and I'm very honored that you've chosen me to take part. And yeah, the 75th anniversary was not simply a celebration. Of course, it was important to mark that anniversary over the course of a year. But what was really important, as you mentioned, was to look to the future and particularly to hear the voices of young people. I'm not so young, but I still look to the future. And I have to say that I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic about the future. And that's because of the role of young people, because of the role of civil society, such as the broad platform that you represent and the work that you're doing from Slovenia with the UN Association, with Bridge 47, but well beyond Slovenia's borders. And I think that that's a key factor. So I think if I were, of course, a crystal ball is a dangerous thing to look into. But if I was to identify the 3 of the key points that I think are necessary, one would certainly be dealing with the climate emergency. I think that's top of everybody's agenda, looking into the medium term and long term. Of course, we have COVID-19, a pandemic at the moment. It's not gone away. It's exacerbated a lot of the problems that we have. The longer term challenge out the other side will be, how do we address the climate emergency that we find ourselves in? So that's the key thing. But the global response so far has been utterly inadequate. We're nowhere near where we need to be. Yes, there are some really positive developments too, of countries coming on board, committing to get to zero emissions, but we're still way off track. So I think that this is a war on nature, the human induced, if you like, and it's up to us to fix it. And I'm optimistic with the role of young people and civil society. We can make headway there, and with enlightened governments, countries around the world. The second is linked to this, and that's reducing inequalities and injustice, social injustice. This again has been thrown into sharp relief by COVID-19. We need to tackle these kind of fragilities. So we've all seen that it's the most vulnerable, marginalized groups and people who have suffered most during the pandemic, are suffering most from the consequences of climate change, suffering most from the way that the global economy has transformed over the years. We need to make sure that people do not get left behind. We need to make sure that we can really try to overcome some of these divisions that there are, the income gaps, education gaps, health gaps. And so this is all about mutual support, it's about solidarity, it's about education, to come back to the theme, if you like, of your talks. It's about particularly education for girls. There is always a clear indication from studies that if girls can be educated and have the chance of being educated, going to school and to secondary school, then they have a disproportionate positive impact on the communities they live in those parts of the world where education is not a given. So, and also, of course, the role of technology can help us there. So my second big change would be to see a reduction in the inequalities and the injustice that we see in the world. And the third comes back also to something that you mentioned at the beginning, Adriana, and that is the role of international cooperation. What we at the United Nations, and maybe diplomats too, would like to refer to as multilateralism. We've seen the power of multilateralism during this pandemic crisis and in dealing with climate change, but we've also seen the limits of multilateralism if it is not fully embraced by major players. So what we need, and I think this will be a change that will be the most welcome, it's something that the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has advocated for, and that is an inclusive multilateralism. And that means equal representation of women in all processes, taking into account the views of young people, civil society, and of course, there's the role of business, big business and small and medium-sized enterprises, the role of cities and regions. And when you look at climate action, that's where the things are really happening and are really making a difference. And of course, the role of science and academia. So a joined up, interconnected, inclusive multilateralism. So those are the three areas that I would highlight, and to say that I'm really hopeful that the headway that can be made, and I look forward to continuing to play a role, even though I may not be a young person. I'm young at heart, and I will continue to do the best I can to help with all of these challenges.
Could you also maybe a bit elaborate on the UN 75 Global Dialogue? So in general, what was the aim? What do the results show? And maybe if there are any specifics for the region that you're responsible for?
Yes, absolutely. Now, as I mentioned, the aim of the exercise with the 75th anniversary was not simply to have a very large cake with 75 candles on it. It was, yes, it's important to look back and to celebrate the progress that has been made within the United Nations and because of the United Nations in so many fields. We can be very proud as an international community and as staff at the United Nations of the progress that has been made. But we would, of course, be deluding ourselves if we felt that it could only be the cake with the candles because everything was great. It's not. And of course, what compounded that view was that something that was initially thought of by the Secretary General as the world's largest conversation, in other words, bringing people together in a physical setting to talk about the future that they want, that we want. Of course, the pandemic changed that. No longer could we have these gatherings of people. We needed to change the format. It would be there were virtual conversations, of course, and the UN the 75 survey became an even more important tool than originally envisaged. There were opinion polls that were done in, if you like, in a more scientifically rigorous manner. The upshot was that we were trying to find out, we wanted to listen. The Secretary General wanted to listen to understand what is the future that you want, that the people want, and where do people think that we are, and where people think that we will be without any changes. And then the bridge that joins, with, as you have in your the bridge 47, we need a bridge that joins between the aspiration, if you like, the future that we want, and where we are now. What is it that we need to do internationally? What does the United Nations need to do to make these a reality? So it's a process of trying to understand people's hopes, their fears about the future, and what role the United Nations could play. And it was pretty impressive. We had 1.5 million respondents, people around the world, including in Slovenia and in other countries in the region where we are working. And indeed, from 195 countries around the world. That's more than there are member states in the United Nations, 193, of course. And this was looking at short-term and long-term priorities and what concrete ideas that people had and have. And of course, where does the UN fit, and what is it that people want from the United Nations? And I think it became clear that from the survey that the overwhelming majority of people believe that the United Nations is a really important player, and that international cooperation is important if we need to tackle the challenges that are out there. Indeed, when you look at the priorities that surfaced, they are universal. Yes, of course, in different parts of the world, there were different constellations, if you like. In this part of the world, the top three were universal access to healthcare, rethinking the global economy, and strengthening global solidarity. So those were the top three. Yes, between different countries, different regions, you would have seen a different picture. One of the key findings was that education was a major priority in many parts of the world. Quality education, healthcare came up again and again, and decent jobs too. So that's really, if you look at the outcomes, that's a clear indication that people do believe that change is needed. I think that COVID-19 sharpened people's focus when it came to thinking about where we are and where we need to be. And so I think the Secretary General found it encouraging that so many people had taken part. Yes, a daunting list of aspirations, but that's precisely what we needed to hear. It's for us as the United Nations and for the countries that make up the United Nations to act on this. And in so doing, to also act on another key finding, which is that if the United Nations is central and playing an important role, well, it needs to be more inclusive, it needs to be more engaged, more accountable, and more effective. In other words, we cannot operate in a vacuum and say that everything's working smoothly. we need to look at ourselves and to make everything that we do as effective as we possibly can. And that includes communication too.
In addition to marking the 75th anniversary last year, we also marked the 5th anniversary of the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we have a decade of action ahead of us to ensure that no one is left behind. And there's a broad spectrum of efforts by various actors and stakeholders to raise awareness on the SDGs, since public support is crucial for informed, coherent, efficient policies on different levels. Could you tell us more about how the UNIS promotes the SDGs and elaborate maybe on some successful actions? And what would you say are the features of successful awareness-raising actions on the SDGs?
Well, we're taking part in one right now. This is a really meaningful way to reach people. And I think a key factor will be the role of civil society, non-governmental organizations, youth groups, UN associations, schools. All of these different components are absolutely crucial in our communications efforts. And yes, as you said, a decade of action. It's almost frightening to think that 5 years have passed already. And the optimism and enthusiasm is still there. I think people are still very committed. And now there is an additional job of work, because in the past year we've gone backwards on quite a few of the goals. I wouldn't say all of them, but quite a few of them. If you look at hunger, if you look at poverty, these are areas where progress has been made. Of course, there's still a long way to go, but we've gone back and we need to push forward and beyond. And 10 years, a decade, sounds like a long time, but to move the dial effectively, to get back where we were and then beyond it, is really a lot of heavy lifting. And that includes the communications around it. And so in our particular setting, the UN Information Service in Vienna, yes, we're working with the people of Austria, but also with the people of Slovenia, Slovakia, and Hungary. We also cooperate very closely with our colleagues in Poland, in the Czech Republic, and also in Turkey. And we seek links to other countries where there is a UN presence, but not necessarily an information center. The countries in the Western Balkans, for example. So just to give you a couple of concrete examples from here in Vienna, how we can project the work that's being done on the Sustainable Development Goals, and how, and this is the key point, how do we move beyond people being aware and interested to taking action? And that for us is the crux of our communication efforts. We identify the what, if you like, what is it that we're trying to communicate, and then we're seeking to answer the question, why care? And then we want to move from that empathy, that understanding, to what next? What can I do to help? And so that means being out there in the community, whether it's virtual or whether it's for real, in person. And we've had to adapt in the past year how we do this. We had a really great initiative with one of the largest shopping malls in Austria, and one of the largest within the Vienna confines. And the director, the head of this shopping mall, was well, he still is extremely keen on the Sustainable Development Goals. Indeed, he did his master's on that very subject and the link with the retail industry. And he contacted us to do some kind of event to mark the 75th anniversary and to put the spotlight on the Sustainable Development Goals by having an exhibition and having staff from the different Vienna-based organizations, and there are quite a few of them at the Vienna International Center here, to have staff there present to interact with shoppers, to introduce them to the Sustainable Development Goals, to make it relevant to their lives, and to try to encourage them to take action. Now, of course, the exhibition could go ahead, but as we got closer to the week of UN Day, which is the 24th of October, it became increasingly clear that the pandemic would not allow us to have that physical presence of staff interacting with shoppers. And that was really quite a sad day when I had to take that decision. But I'm pleased to say that the exhibition stayed there. We were able to reach a lot of people, and it's something that we can build on. And a legacy product, if you like, is that in that shopping mall, there is a huge banner permanently fixed with all of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals on. So it's really reaching a lot of people in that way. And there will be other initiatives which we'll be doing with that particular shopping mall, just as one example. We work a lot with teachers, including in Slovenia. My colleague Bostian Jaman has been involved in this for a long time with you and others in the UN Association. This is a really important way. And I was speaking with my colleagues in Warsaw, actually just earlier today before this, and they have an initiative with teachers too that they are going to renew and strengthen. So the role of teachers, there it's a bit like a social media influencer. They are such an important figure. A teacher is such an important figure in a student's life, and a source of inspiration and influence in a very positive sense. And so being able to ensure that the Sustainable Development Goals are really embedded where it's possible in the curriculum and in the classroom, the better it is. And we've seen huge interest amongst the teachers and amongst the teaching universities where teachers are trained, and certainly here in Austria, but beyond, we intend to continue with that. And again, another example is librarians. My colleagues in the Czech Republic have got an initiative that's starting up this year to help to educate librarians about the Sustainable Development Goals and how to then reflect that in the way that the libraries work. So these are just a few concrete ideas. A final one is in the digital space. Being able to tell compelling stories about the goals, each and every goal, and how this is relevant to an individual's life. It's very easy to look at the goals and think, oh, that's for people in sub-Saharan Africa or in the South Asia or in Latin America. This is not for us in the European Union. Everything's just great. Of course, that isn't the case. The goals are, of course, universal in their application and their relevance. So how can we tell human stories that break through the statistics, break through the numbers, and help people to move from caring to acting? And we've done that really successfully within the UN family here in Vienna, with a whole series of stories that help to do precisely that. And through our website, it's possible to click through on each of the Sustainable Development Goals and see examples of stories from the Vienna-based organizations on what they are doing to make a difference to people's lives on each of the goals where they have a role to play. Those are some of the examples I would have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nesirky. I'm Patricia Vetic. I'm from Bridge 47 project. Our project is mainly focusing on achieving target 4.7. We believe that action to reach SDG target 4.7 are actually crucial to achieving all SDGs. And this is by assisting people, communities, state and non-state entities to fully assume their responsibilities as actors in a single, interdependent and interconnected world. In Europe, this involves addressing the global issues directly linked to our local context and exploring how we as individuals and as a societies can actually act to tackle these broader issues and resolve complex problems. And my question would be, how is the UN and UNIS actually helping achieving this target and supporting global citizenship education?
So this is really important, and I addressed it a little bit in some of the other questions, but this is a good opportunity to dig in a little bit deeper. What we've seen is really encouraging. Initiatives such as yours, and a growing recognition in the education sector more generally about the importance of making sure that the Sustainable Development Goals are not an afterthought or an adjunct, but they become part and parcel of just about every lesson that you could imagine, any subject that you could imagine being taught in a school, right from the very youngest age up to beyond school age and into universities. I spoke this morning to a group of graduate and postgraduate students who are tackling, through a Model United Nations conference, the topic of food security and nutrition, and this is something that is part of their studies at their respective universities. At the school level, primary and secondary school, you have far greater experience, hands-on, in your classrooms, in how that works, and what we found, just to give a concrete example here in Austria, is that by working with the teacher training institutes, they may be universities or other colleges of education for teachers, by working very closely with them, this is a way, if you like, to train the trainers. So we have organized courses in person and also online that brings together people, the teaching staff of these universities or training colleges, to help them to better understand what the UN is doing, where we are, and then they are able to relay that further. And crucially, when it comes to the whole idea of global citizenship, I remember from my time as the spokesman for the previous Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, this was a major theme of his, wherever he went around the world in speaking with young people and others too, was this idea of global citizenship, that you need to look beyond your borders. You should be proud of who you are and where you're from, but you need to see the connections beyond your borders. And you framed this very nicely at the beginning, Patricia, that this interconnected role of looking at the global challenges and how can they be implemented locally. And this is one of the reasons for optimism about the goals and being able to get back on track, that very often it's at the local level that we're seeing a movement, we're seeing traction, we're seeing results, and then at a regional level. Here in Austria, I've seen actually quite small villages making sure that they look at everything they're doing in their community and linking it to one or other of the Sustainable Development Goals. And if we can instill, and you can instill, that kind of enthusiasm at the local level, then that helps to project things well beyond a small rural community. It helps to build an understanding that this is an enterprise we are all engaged in. The challenges that we face may have local consequences in our own lives, but the ramifications are regional, national, and global. The examples are obvious, of course. So those are some of the thoughts that I would have in this area. I mean, I think it's really crucial. It's indispensable, the role of education and educators to really encourage young people to think in a global way. This they do in their interactions on social media, the way they look at the world, and we can capture that spirit, I think. And I'd like to congratulate you for embracing this and pushing it to so hard in everything that you do.
As you mentioned, Target 4.7 reflects to the transformative power of education by promoting global citizenship, sustainable development, human rights, gender equality, peace, and of course, appreciation of cultural diversity. It requires multiple approaches and different disciplines to build capacity in order to engage with the complexities and also the uncertainties that define the key interdependent global issues, as we mentioned them. And learning plays here a central role in addressing these challenges of the 2030 agenda and must be recognized as an important force to transform and sustain society. Equally valuing all forms of education, which I think is quite crucial, and supporting lifelong learning processes and opportunities is the first steps towards achieving the 2030 agenda vision. And I'm wondering, how does the UN supports recognition of the value of lifelong learning, and that is supported through formal, non-formal, and also informal education. So not only those in schools, but as we can say, we are learning from the cradle to the grave.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I feel that way every single day. It's one of the things that motivates me and continues to inspire me, is to hear from others working in this field, and to sense the enthusiasm, the knowledge, the expertise that resides within many people, and both you, Adriana, Patricia, I know that you're representing organizations, but simply working with the two of you, it's clear that you have a very deep understanding of the goals, very deep understanding of the role of global citizenship and education in this field. And I think you're absolutely right that education goes well beyond the school playground or the university campus. This is something that we're all engaged in throughout our lives. And there are settings where people who are no longer at university but still plan to learn or wish to learn can do so. Here in Austria, there's a whole structure of adult learning centers, so where people can study languages, they can study all kinds of different subjects, It may be because it's simply of personal interest. It may be because they're seeking to add qualifications to help them with their careers. And what was really encouraging last year was that that this network decided that they wanted to place as a central component of everything they do the Sustainable Development Goals. And I was pleased to be able to speak at one of these adult learning centers. I was able to speak about the goals and to hear from those who are involved in this project. That was very encouraging to me. And I think, again, as you mentioned and we've discussed already earlier, the digital space is so important in this regard. There are so many tools that we can use. There are videos, there are different activities, different groups online. There is a wealth of material, including in a bewildering array of languages that's there for teachers, for other educators, and for lay people who do not necessarily know anything about the subject but wish to acquaint themselves on citizenship, global citizenship, and on the goals more generally. So I think that this is something that we really need to work on even more in the coming years. And one of the priorities that we have our communications priorities for 2021. It's about mobilizing for the planet. It's about fighting inequality and standing for inclusion and realizing gender equality. Some of the things that you were just the areas you were just mentioning, Patricia. And of course, overlaying all of this, how can we respond to COVID-19 and recover better? And the way that we want to do this is by telling personal stories and to providing concrete examples of the difference this can make in people's lives. And I think this feeds through to the global citizenship education in a less formal setting. And a last point on this, so I'm not going on too long, but a last point on this is that the role of accurate, verified information in the digital sphere is so important. We've seen misinformation, disinformation out there that's had actually quite a devastating impact in sometimes related to COVID-19, related to hygiene measures, that related to masks or no masks, and now vaccines. So that there is a really very active community of anti-vaxxers who may have their views and are entitled to them, but we really need to guard against the misinformation that's out there. We need to be able to ensure that there is truly verified, scientifically founded information that people can refer to. Yes, there needs to be a dialogue, but we cannot allow the scientific advances that have been made within the space of a year to develop vaccines to really be shunted aside. We need this is the big hope to help us through this, and that's just one example. Of course, it's a pandemic. We haven't seen anything like this in 100 years, arguably ever, because of the global nature of commerce, travel, and so on. We need to get a grip on it. The digital space is just as important, and making sure that people understand their global citizenship responsibility also includes, what do I share on social media? What do I share on Facebook, Twitter? What do I like and not like? Am I really sure this is what it says it is. So pausing, and you need to pledge to pause, to say, I'm not going to press the button immediately. I'm going to check before I do so. So I think that's an important part of global citizenship too, in an informal sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nesirky. Maybe continuing, you've already touched upon on partnerships with various stakeholders, and the UN system has an extensive track record in building and maintaining multi-stakeholder partnerships. When we talk about the SDGs and global citizenship education, where do you see the role of the civil society?
Well, the civil society is a broad concept, of course, that involves non-governmental organizations that may be part of an umbrella group like SLOGA. It may be individual non-governmental organizations. It could be youth groups. It could be women's groups, those working on indigenous affairs. It could be faith groups, workers, trade unions, and so on. So it's a rather a broad field, but in the run-up to agreeing on the Sustainable Development Goals, the input of civil society really was impressive and important. Of course, ultimately it was the member states, the 193 countries, that needed to decide and agree. But the lobbying, the inputs, the suggestions, the ideas, the proposals that came from civil society and other sectors from the business community had a profound impact on the way that this Agenda 2030 was conceived, negotiated, and agreed by consensus, which is no mean feat. I mean, I think one can see that the trade-offs that were necessary to get there, because we have 17 goals, which if you're a communicator is a little bit unwieldy, but I think it shows the depth of discussion, that the number of competing sometimes interests that there were. So this is going to continue to be the case. Civil society broadly, within those different categories, if you like, has the role to help to shape and inform public debate and, crucially, policy making. But it also has the role of, if you like, holding governments to account, holding their feet to the fire, to ensure that marginalized groups, vulnerable groups and communities are not overlooked, so that nobody is left behind. So I think at a national level, national scale, this is really important, but it goes well beyond that, feeding into international discussions about anything from climate to food security to gender equality, LGBT rights, the rights of those with disabilities. So really, really important. And I think that one of the most rewarding parts of the job that we do in the UN Information Service is precisely the work with non-governmental organizations, with civil society more generally, and long may that continue. It will continue to be really, really important to us.
Previously, you've already touched upon the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic, so maybe we can also close this conversation with this currently extremely pressing issue. The coronavirus outbreak has exposed and exacerbated the inequalities, as you've already mentioned, and certainly affected and might even jeopardize progress in realization of the SDGs. So in your view, which issues should the international community prioritize to ensure people-centered sustainable recovery?
Well, I think it's indisputable that we've gone backwards. As I was mentioning, not across all 17 goals, but it's obvious that progress has really been damaged, and that we now need to use this decade of action to push forward, particularly in areas that will help the most vulnerable, people who've, in a sense, been pushed further back. Those communities in developing countries, but not only in developing countries, in middle-income countries, and in the developed world, where unemployment has become such a devastating feature of people's lives, something that they never could have imagined 18 months ago. So that obviously will be a major undertaking, namely to get the economy going again, and in so doing, to structure it in such a way that it is more robust, and that is more sustainable. The role of the business community in this is really going to be important. We've seen companies, large and small, wanting to help to shape the future, the economic future globally and within countries and regions. And that's, of course, self-interest, but it's enlightened self-interest, in the sense that it's understood that the way the world has developed with the global economy and trade and so on, it's worked well for many, but it has left too many people either on one side or lagging behind. So I think the economy and reducing those inequalities will be really important. We can't help people to help themselves out of poverty without ensuring that countries make that economic progress. I think another area is healthcare, and this is obviously one area that the United Nations wishes to see progress. The Secretary General is firmly of the view that countries should be looking at how we can get to universal health care. It is a basic right. It should not leave people who are unable to afford healthcare to languish, to suffer, and to die, or to lead lives not to the full extent that they could, because they are chronically ill. There are a lot of things that can be fixed relatively easily, and I think the World Health Organization obviously has an important role well beyond the pandemic in handling that. And then another, so it's about inequalities, it's about healthcare as part of that, and education as well. And of course, another key factor is climate action. Coming back to the beginning, if you like, that is an area where we know what needs to be done. We've got COP26 coming up later this year in Glasgow, postponed for 1 year because of the pandemic. Emissions didn't stop, climate change didn't stop, so there's a job of work to be done. We're seeing major countries coming together now to contribute, as we've said. So that will remain a really important area if we're to build back better. as the saying goes. And then another area that I think we sometimes tend to overlook, and that is human rights. Human rights have also been under attack and have been eroded, not starting with the pandemic. It predates that by some way, but I think certainly from the view of the Secretary General, human rights have been eroded, and particularly during the pandemic, we've seen that emergency measures, for example, have been used as a Trojan horse to start to suppress, to limit the space for civil society. And that needs to change. And so we will continue to have a very sharp focus. And I think that's an area where the international community needs to be very alert to make sure that human rights really is running as a thread through everything that we do and everything that we put together to recover from this pandemic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nesirky, for sharing your thoughts and views and also supporting our initiatives. The SDGs do recognize that each and every individual has a role to play in ensuring a sustainable present and future for all. And we believe that only with joint efforts we can pursue this vision. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for your questions, and I wish you the best of luck with the other talks that will be part of this series.
Thank you very much.